Hi, my name is Amit Hardi. I am the CEO of Nukebox Studios. Uh, we are developers and publishers of original IPs focused on the global markets. Uh, One of the games that we built and released last year called Food Truck Chef happened to be a breakout hit with uh, you know top 200 grossing in 150 countries and been the top downloaded games in more than 180 countries.
So let's start talking about how you actually got into the game industry.
We've always been excited about gaming. I think I personally, as a kid, have grown up with games, and it's always been an interesting space. It so happened that we got to work with games. I mean, we started experimenting with building games back in the J2ME days. We built about close to 200 titles. Worked with Nokia, Microsoft, a lot of the companies, and while we were building games for others, we realized there could be an interesting play if we can build original titles of our own and publish and see how that goes. And for us, that's how the journey actually started. So about 3-4 years ago is when we decided that one of us has to kind of take on the reins of gaming if we are to really carve a dent in this space. And that's when I moved from the enterprise part of our business to pure gaming. From then on, it's just been a wild ride. I mean, it's been a very interesting journey so far, and we're very excited about the future.
Right. So you spoke about, or rather, it's a very well known fact that your game Food Truck Chef, has been one of the first Indian developed IPs, an Indian developed game, by an Indian, game development company has gone on to get such rave reviews globally. I mean, you mentioned that you've been in the top 150. Top downloads in about over 150 countries. So let's talk a little bit more about that ride and how your entire process has been.
Yeah. So I think before even Food Truck Chef was conceptualized, we were experimenting with quite a lot of titles. For us, it was about these experiments which will yield us to something which is worthwhile chasing. I think we built about close to 14 titles and we abandoned them at certain stages. But then when we conceptualized Food Truck Chef, we were very clear of the audiences that we wanted to go after. And with that audience in mind, we started working backwards in terms of the kind of concept, the kind of market gap which exists. And that's how it all came about. And so what we evolved in the process was the entire gating process in which we are able to validate the right KPIs at the right time. Even before an MVP, we were just talking about a stripped down version of the app where we could just play and test and see how that manifests, and and iterate as we go along. So if we are able to bring that audience and close the loop faster in the feedback loop, then the product essentially starts to mature.
Right.
That's what we did. And then and when we soft launched the product, it was very exciting to see the numbers trickle in, and we were looking at extremely good retention rates, engagement rates were pretty good. And it was funny when we did very small UA campaigns, and somebody came back and told me the campaign is already profitable within 24 hours, and that was like very, very exciting because um, these are small things which kind of give you a kind of clue how the product is doing and what potential it holds. That's when we knew we are onto something.
Okay, so you just spoke about that you obviously tried and tested about 14 to 15 games before you actually settled down on the right one. What was the thought process, and what are the factors that you were evaluating when you decided to abandon a lot of a lot of what could potentially be some very interesting concepts?
We did abandon quite a lot of interesting concepts, but then we realized that if you're going to put in so much of effort, it has to be worthwhile. So then at that point in time, you have to leave your personal biases aside and just trust the data. And we were just looking at the core KPIs of the game, and we wanted to chase something which is solid and scalable. When I say scalable, means that it has to be a game that you can service for years, and there is enough content cadence plus capability of engaging that audience for the long run. And from all the games that we saw, I think while there were some promising signs here and there, but I think nothing was as solid as Food Truck Chef.
Right.
That's when we just narrowed down and went all on.
Right. So now I'm going to go on to the next question. I mean, you just did a panel not more than a couple of hours ago, where you were, which is the Predictions 2019 panel, where we were talking about, what we see as the future of the Indian gaming industry, in the next 12 months.
Yeah.
You mentioned, and I'm going to quote you here, the Indian game industry is a bride all dressed up, waiting to get married. Now let's obviously go beyond just just the metaphor, and perhaps talk a little bit more about where the Indian game industry is headed.
Pretty much all the signs are there. We are seeing and watching the space very closely, and the download numbers are there, the engagement numbers are there. We're talking about close to 400 million smartphone enabled users coming in, and the data barrier, etc., behind us. I think payment mechanisms some are there, some are to be enabled. So I think pretty much the infrastructure is all coming into place. I think if we correlate this with the e-commerce space in India, I think before even the Flipkarts of the world, there were applications like IRCTC, for example, which was doing huge amount of volumes, and which brought in a lot of first-time internet users, first-time PC users, first-time credit card users into the space, and they trusted their money with the government, and there was huge amount of transactions happening, and that paved the way for anything internet enabled or commerce enabled that followed suit after that. That's going to be kind of resonating in this space as well. So I think it's all about solving this mystery of what kind of games will engage the audiences, what kind of what kind of potential genres will unlock that or bring all the pieces together.
Right.
So I think if somebody makes the argument that the infrastructure is going to take time, or we need to add more payment mechanisms, that's a false argument.
Right.
I think it's just about if you're able to create the right game which unlocks the value that people feel like spending in the game.
Right.
So that's going to be interesting to watch out for.
So let's go forward to what you believe are the right monetization techniques or tools that can be used. Obviously, there are a whole host of possible methods.
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, is one of the better ones, and better for younger and younger developers and indie developers to kind of start looking at before it's too late?
The India market has been heavily skewed towards ad monetization. The West is heavily skewed towards in-app purchases, and so each one has a different bearing. So if you're talking about in-app purchases, I mean your game economy design and the free-to-play per se, I mean you have to have the right economy system in place for the users to kind of experience the game, and I could still complete the game or continue to play the game as a non-spender, or I could move faster in the game by making a few in-app purchases and not regret spending that money. So, and the central goal that it is chasing is that you're giving the user the experience that keeps him longing and coming back to your game. If you're able to solve that, I think IAP is a very, very solid strategy. And we're talking about ad monetization. You're talking about ad monetization which is designed in the core loop of the game. So ad monetization should not be an afterthought where you say, okay, I built a game, now let me just place ads. That is not a great strategy. So both are kind of different, but there are hybrid strategies as well where you're saying that, okay, bulk of my focus is going to be, or for us, for example, 80% of our revenues is in-app purchases and 20% comes through ads. and there is a sweet balance of how you. Most of our ad placements are opt-in ads, so there's absolutely no friction in terms of users. And at times when we pulled off the ads, we had users write to us that, hey, where are the ads gone? I really want them back, and
Really?
yeah, that's counterintuitive. I know.
Yeah, I know.
But if it's smartly placed, it's a win-win situation because the user doesn't mind watching an ad or two as long as he's being rewarded.
Right.
So that's like the sweet spot.
Right. Now, you are one of the few large game companies in the country that have build the company off the bootstraps. I mean, you guys had the opportunity to raise capital at multiple times in your growth journey. I mean, what was the thought process behind not wanting to go down the venture funded the investment route?
So I think the timing was exactly when the first month of launch of Food Truck Chef, and everything exploded. And it was a very interesting situation to be in because we were looking at solving the user acquisition problem so that the game continues to grow. And that was the time when we were talking to a few funds, and then we realized that it's just the temporary tide that we need to fend off, and that's the wave we need to ride. And we realized that if we raise the money, there's going to be a certain overhead,
Right.
and so at that same time we started talking to a few partners, and we realized there is different ways of solving that problem. And we partnered with Tilting Point,
Right.
who is our user acquisition partner, and they had a very interesting proposition where they said, you know what, we will not just run the campaign, we can also fund the campaigns for you. And at that point in time, that was the only money that we needed, and that got solved. So we signed up with them, and from then on there's been no looking back. Had we raised the money there, we would not be able to justify in terms of where we would be using that money.
Right.
So it didn't make sense. So we managed to remain bootstrapped and private. Without diluting the equity, we managed to get a growth fund which could continue to grow the game.
Right. So let's also talk a little bit more about the. Let's talk about I'm going to put you on the spot, and I'm going to tell you to tell me or tell the viewers what is going to happen in the Indian game industry in the next 12 months.
I think I'm the wrong person for that question because we're not focused on the India market. We're focused on the global markets. But then I can talk a bit about the global markets in terms of what's going to happen. So I think, we definitely can't predict, but then at least the data suggests that, there's a huge pressure on CPIs. So LTV is becoming more and more mainstream. So games as a service is going to become more and more prominent. So live ops is going to be the focus area.
Right.
That's how you can derive maximum value of the users that you acquire. And then to ease out the pressure on the CPIs, the other logical route for companies is to tie up with large licenses or IPs that can bring in certain audiences. And that's how the market is pivoting towards, so that you're able to leverage on the cost and then monetize your audiences better. Because if you just look at the market dynamics, right, 30% of the revenues is taken away by the platforms. You have to do a certain amount of UA spend to bring in the audiences and to solve the discovery problem. So essentially, you're spending a huge amount of money on Facebook, Google, Insta, and Snap, and all of that. And so there's very little left in the value chain for the developers to actually sustain. Right? So it's great for the platforms, but the developer has to work upwards in terms of sustaining and growing that. So then the logical step for developers becomes on leveraging that across a portfolio of games and sustain that. So you can look at LTV across games versus just a single game. I think it's exciting times in the gaming industry right now. I think there's dimensions of the science coming into games and the ease in which you can do the commerce of games. I think what is important is as a developer, one needs to be focused on and has to have a very crystal clear vision of the kind of product that you want to build and the kind of audiences that you're going after. It's the same set of tools and same kind of tools that are available to the large developers and to everybody else. So I don't think infrastructure is ever going to be a problem. I think it's just about the vision and the right execution strategy which is going to make or break the studio. So all I can say is all the best, and it's a small industry, and if you can help each other